Well, it's not a monolith. It's an entity made up of many different sections. So it's hard to kind of generalise. The mainstream media, I think, is highly variable in its performance. There's good journalists in every major outlet, a lot of minor outlets as well, who are producing high quality journalism. There's a lot of what I think is poor editorial control and management. That's particularly the case at News Limited, which is which has a business model that is really based on running particular agendas rather than trying to provide high quality journalism. So that's a particular problem with that outlet. All the mainstream media are under pressure in terms of resourcing. So there are fewer journalists now, and they're doing more, and they're doing filing across more platforms, and they're having to cover more areas, and they're becoming less specialist in what they do, and that's harming the quality of journalism, and that won't get any better anytime soon. So, but at the same time, there's an emerging independent media, but emerging independent media, and even organisations like my own aren't the answer to declining mainstream media. You do need a strong mainstream media that can do things like fight a defamation case, or take governments to court, or take wealthy corporations to court to fight injunctions. So you need strong institutional media, and we're losing that kind of strong institutional media at the moment in Australia. Well, there's a lot in that question. I mean, the problem with News Limited, as I've already said, is that it sees its business model in running agendas, and that's the case with Fox News in the US. It's certainly the case with the News Limited controlled outlets here. But even so, I mean, again, you can't sort of stereotype it as a monolith. I mean, Daily Telegraph and the Herald's done it much worse, for example, in that regard than the Courier Mail, which is much better in terms of political coverage. It's actually a much better newspaper. And you look at, well, I'm not actually as fussed about Gina Rinehart being on the share register at Fairfax as a lot of other people are. I think it's good that someone's investing in journalism. There's not very many people investing in journalism at the moment. Now, I understand why Gina Rinehart is doing that. She wants to do it for influence, but nonetheless, Fairfax has successfully resisted a lot of would-be influences in previous decades, and so far it's resisted her as well. Oh, there's a complete disconnect. I mean, Canberra is a completely different world to the rest of ordinary Australia. It's a very our priorities here, and when I say we, I mean the priorities of the political class, and I include journalists and politicians and public servants and people engaged in politics more generally. They're very different to the priorities of ordinary Australians. Ordinary Australians have very little interest in politics, very little knowledge of politics, and basically what they get in terms of politics is what they see on the commercial evening news bulletins, and that's pretty much it. They don't read newspapers. They don't engage with politics via social media. They're not. The disconnect is almost total between the great mass of voters and certainly people in Canberra. I don't think they're going to be able to close that gap. I mean, I think social media present an opportunity for one of the great challenges that political parties face. You know that they're no longer in any stretch of the imagination, by any stretch of the imagination, mass movements. The challenge is for them is to reconnect with voters and to connect with grassroots, or connect at a grassroots level with communities. And social media and online media represent a vehicle for doing that. And I think there's great potential there for political parties to actually use new media to try to reverse the great slide in their membership that's been going on, or reverse the great slide in engagement that's been happening in Australia and in other Western societies as well. And the first party, I think, that actually works out how to do that effectively, say, for example, works out how somehow to use the fact that such a huge proportion of Australians are on Facebook as a way of actually connecting with people I think is going to actually do very well, but I don't see any signs of that happening. The difference here in Australia is that we have compulsory voting. You don't have to get people, you don't have to force people out to vote. And in the US, so many resources are put into actually getting people physically to the polls to vote for you. Whereas in Australia, everyone's got to show up for an election. So the only issue is actually persuading them to cast a vote for you. So we've got a system that actually mitigates against engagement. We don't have a system that actually encourages engagement. We have a system that is almost set and forget. We have political parties that are hollowed out and have a few thousand members tops. They're run by apparatchiks and power brokers with very limited grassroots involvement. They get paid a lot of money by taxpayers, tens of millions of dollars by taxpayers just for showing up at elections. So you have a system that has a really sort of it's inbuilt disconnection with the priorities of ordinary Australians. And social media is not going to change that. Only when parties are so desperate for electoral relevance that they will look at all options will that work. I'm a long-term opponent of compulsory voting. I think it's highly problematic, but it does come with certain advantages. Like for example, there is I think a moderating tendency with compulsory voting. I think you do tend to get more moderate politics compared to say what you get in the United States, which is very polarised politics. But if you look at other countries that don't have compulsory voting either, and that's the great majority of democracies, you don't get that polarisation. Like you go to the UK, doesn't have compulsory voting, and yet they're pretty moderate. So it's you can overdraw the lessons from the United States about the impact of voluntary voting. But I suppose the response to all that is, look, Australia's performance economically and socially is actually pretty good, and you could say that's the result of a system democratic system that we've got, and that's one that's been given to us by compulsory voting. The tip I give to everyone, regardless of whether they want to get into political journalism or any other sort of journalism, is specialise. Because there are so many journalism students out there, communication students out there who are potentially competing with you. And the more you specialise, the more you make a particular subject area your own, I think the more appeal you'll have to employers. And that sounds a bit counterintuitive because I made this earlier point that because of resource cuts, journalists are being forced to do more across more areas. But there are still successful publications in journalism, and they are specialist publications. And in fact, there's a growing appetite for specialist journalism provided by people who are well informed and know what they're talking about, because you can't get that from the mainstream media anymore. The days of the mainstream media where you had an industrial relations journalist or a health journalist or a science journalist who just did that stuff, so they knew it, they were experts. They're going, if they're not gone already. And the more the people specialise, I think the more chances there are of getting a job. And it may not be a job with The Age or The Australian, but it might be with a niche publication that actually values specialisation. And that's as good a place as any to start with a career in journalism, and after that you can make your own way.